My name is Dr. Claudia Sonder, and I'm the president of the Napa Community Animal Response Team. We've put together a series of videos describing ways to assess and examine and stabilize small ruminants that you might encounter out in the field, whether you're doing a shelter-in-place mission or an evacuation mission. And small ruminants are they're very interesting, they're often very friendly, but in certain situations they are not domesticated and they can pose a threat to your safety. So we also take some time to review common safety measures and ways to help you feel a little bit more confident when you're asked to assess one of these animals. You will often hear small goats and sheep called ruminants. And what a ruminant is it's an animal that has a large fermentation vat, one of the 4 stomachs in there, called a rumen. And the rumen is wonderful in the sense that it can store lots of water and it makes them more resilient after a fire as far as their water needs and that sort of thing. But a rumen is very sensitive to changes in pH. There's bacteria in there that do a lot of the digestion work that need a nice neutral, if not slightly alkaline pH to function. And if you inadvertently come in and use a large quantity of grain or chicken feed or something that they're not used to eating, and you use that as food, you can really hurt them, especially chicken feed. It's very, very toxic to small ruminants. So when we send you out in the field to attend to these animals, we're usually going to send you with something yummy that's not going to offend their gut, and we use small quantities to attract them in. And then when you bring them into the shelter, you need to be very careful about how they're fed. Ideally, we get in touch with the owner and we continue whatever type of feed they were eating at home, we continue that in the shelter. Animals that are feeling what we call rumen acidosis, or when they've had too much of an acidic diet, like this chicken is going to do here, they will become depressed. So sometimes if you come to a property and it's burned over and the animals have had access to grain or something they're not used to eating, you will come upon an animal that is laying in the corner, not chewing its cud, oftentimes a hunched back, ears down or back, not getting up with the rest of the herd, and that can be a very serious medical condition. So that's one of the things we really stress with small ruminants, is to try and maintain a consistent diet and not give them too much of an acidic food. The second thing that's really important with small ruminants, or any of the animals that you care for in Napa CART, is if you come upon the property and there's no water, you really need to talk to your supervisor about that and try and determine from the request form when the animals were last seen. If they haven't had water in a couple days, they're going to be very thirsty, but it's actually dangerous to give them ad lib water or free water, because their body will have concentrated enough salt that you can actually hurt them or give them what we call water toxicity and overload their brain with water. So with small ruminants, with horses, with birds, if you come to a site that has no water available and the animals are very thirsty, stop, have a conversation with your supervisor, and the supervisor will reach out to the veterinarian in charge and make a plan for reintroducing water. It's safe to introduce a cup or two to a small animal like this. You could do approximately a 1/4 gallon to a 100-pound to 200-pound ruminant. To a horse, you could do a 3-gallon bucket. It's a good place to start, and then you give them some time, and then over the course of your visit, reintroduce them to some water. On a shelter-in-place assignment, if you are sent out to look for small ruminants, meaning sheep and goats, oftentimes you need a good strategy to be able to observe the animals from a distance, get a sense of their general welfare, and then attract them up into an area where you can take a closer look. I'll give you a demonstration of one way that you might accomplish that. It's never a bad idea to have a little bit of grain in your hand. Not much, a cup or so, because most animals know what that is, and they will come to it. You'll notice I have a lead rope in my hand as well, and I'm going to walk through the gate, and I'm going to talk. First, I'm just going to look from a distance. And what I'm looking for is, how do the animals look? Do they look painful? Are they limping? Is one staying away from the rest of the herd? Is there evidence that they have been burned over? Is their ground burned over? I look for those sort of things. And then as I approach them, what I'm looking for is a bright, alert animal that comes running to me or that sees me and wants to walk towards me, and ideally that is not limping at the walk, but that looks like it's in good shape. And I'm going to call them and see what they do. Hey guys, look what I have. Look what I have. I've got some food. Yes, I do. And what I see are two very bright animals that come right up for food. I see no evidence of limping. I'm looking at them. I'm looking at their limbs. I don't see any evidence of swelling. Their eyes are open. I don't see discharge. And I have two animals that are very interested in some food. Now, in order to get them to where I can look at them a little more closely, I'm going to navigate so that I can get them into a smaller pen. And one very good trick, if you're needing to capture animals that are relatively domesticated, is to lay a rope around the food, allow them to come to the food, and then you have your animal. So that's one trick if they're relatively domesticated. And these animals appear to be. They know I'm a human. They know I've got good things. So now we'll go ahead and we'll try and catch them. Whenever we're working with small ruminants, we really do need to think about safety. Even though they look very tame, these are animals that are really powerful, and they can very quickly create a situation where you could be harmed. When I'm working with these kind of animals, I'm always careful to have my knees bent, to keep my head back, to be sure that I am aware of where my body is at all times, and realize that if you enter a gate with something delicious, it is very likely that you're going to get mugged by these animals that want this food. So even though I walk up to this gate with good intent, if I have my hands in the wrong place, they can push that gate and they can injure my hand. So I'm going to go ahead and get them into this little paddock here simply with some food, but I do that with the knowledge that I have to be kind of quick about it because I've got something they want. And again, if you watch, I'm very careful to keep my knees bent, to go ahead and use my back to brace the gate. I'm going to walk through. I'm going to shut the gate. You'll notice my knees are bent. You'll notice one's on the fence, so good opportunity to be hurt. And then I'm going to go ahead and come on in here with Lieutenant Dan. I'm going to put this down. And then you can see that very quickly I have him captured. We're going to let his friend go ahead and eat, and we're going to take him out. Come on, sweetheart. Out you go. And that's a very safe way to catch a goat that's tame. And this is my assistant, Jessie. In times of COVID-19, Jessie has her mask on. I've taken my mask off for this filming, but Jessie and I share a pod together. Let's do a quick anatomy review of the goat, just so that we can speak in common terms when we're discussing what you're seeing in the field. So a few of these things will seem obvious, but it's good to review. This is his skull or head, eyes, nostrils, mouth, horns are up here. This is his neck area. If he were a different breed of goat, he'd have ears here, but these are normal ear buds for him, and these guys hear perfectly well. We've got his shoulder blade, elbow. This is the forearm here. That round structure there is his knee. This is his knee or carpus, and it will often have a little callus on it. This is his cannon bone. This is his fetlock, very much like a horse that bends. And then he has 2 pasterns and 2 hoofs, okay? So we call this joint, we call this the pastern collectively and the hoof collectively. This is his coronary band, which is the junction between the haired area and the hoof itself. And in a normal goat, these will look symmetrical and have good range of motion. This is what we call his back or top line. Ribs are here. And then as we come to the back end, he has a similar conformation to a horse. They have a stifle joint, which is the true knee. And most goats, like most horses, don't want you to touch their stifle. This is the gaskin area here. This elbow-shaped joint is his hock. And you can see that's a normal response of a prey animal to touching the hind limb. That's why we keep our body off to the side. This is his metatarsus, and you can see how fast he is. So a cannon bone, then there's a fetlock, pastern, and his hoof down here. So basically from the hock down and the knee down, the anatomy is same on the front and the back. This is probably the hardest thing for people to remember. That's the hock joint. And again, all normal behaviors. Why you need a good assistant when you're doing this kind of assessment. This is a male goat, so he will urinate from a penis down here. Female goat is going to lift her tail and urinate from the back. And if you see testicles, then you need to have a heightened level of caution for your own safety. Goats and sheep have very different looking eyes than most people are used to looking at. They have what we call horizontal pupils. So instead of the pupils being round, you're going to see sort of an elongated pupil, and that's very normal. And so it takes some getting used to if you're not used to looking at them. Compare the one eye to the other, make sure both pupils are the same. And if you're still not sure, you can look at the other animals in the pen and they will all have that horizontal pupil configuration. So right now what we're going to talk about is safe handling of a small ruminant. As you can see, Jessie has Dan here and she's got her gloves on. And Dan is a relatively tame goat, and so we're able to look at him without having to use too much restraint. In most cases, once we start manipulating these animals, they don't really want to have their feet held. They don't really want to be manipulated. At the end of the day, they're still prey animals, and when we reach for parts of their body, their brain says, that's not safe, especially if they don't know you. So what we do is first we're just going to start with where you want your body to be. As you can see, Jessie is off to the side. She's got her knees slightly bent. Lieutenant Dan is a La Mancha goat, so he does not have ears. That's a natural variant. There are many different types of goats out there. As you can see, he does have the remnants of horns, and even these small horns can really hurt you. He can put his head down and bop you, and goats will do that. So it's very smart when you're working on goats or approaching goats to make sure that you keep your head off to the side, that you're not right there. You don't want to put your body right in front of a goat. Even though this is a friendly goat, if something scares him from behind, he can jump right over you or onto you. And these little feet are very powerful. Believe it or not, their little hooves are sharp and they can hurt you. So when I'm first looking at a goat, what I try to do is assess their overall comfort level and how bright they are. And you'll often hear us talk about bright, alert, responsive. Is the animal aware of the environment? Is he aware of us? Is he responding to me? As you can see, Dan is chewing his cud right now, which is a common thing that ruminants will do as prey animals. They eat quickly when they feel safe, and then they come back later, regurgitate up the material that's in their large rumen, and they chew it. And it's a real sign of well-being. So when I arrive on scene and I'm trying to assess whether the animals are okay or not, I always feel better when I see them chewing their cud. And it's not unusual, especially for a young ruminant like Dan, to have a little bit of green material coming out of his nose. That's okay. We don't like to see that in horses, but it's okay to see that in a small ruminant. So I look at him, he's bearing weight on all 4 limbs. When I look at his limbs, they're all relatively the same size, meaning I don't see one that's more swollen than the other. If Jesse walks him for just a few steps this way and back, what you'll see is that Dan is not limping. He's able to bear full weight and he's able to follow her, looking around at his environment. If you think of an assessment as a head to tail assessment, we've looked at his nose, we've commented on the fact that he's chewing his cud. Both of his eyes are fully open. There's no tearing, there's no discharge. He doesn't have one that's squinting. He's not coughing, he's not making any noise when he's breathing. And then if I look at his general posture, he looks relatively comfortable. A goat that's experiencing pain will often have a hunched back. They will often be sunken in if they're not feeling well, and he's not showing any of those things. If he had ears, ruminant ears are very expressive, like horse ears. They're going to listen to what's going on. But a ruminant that's not feeling well will often send their ears down and back, and we can talk about that on another animal. He won't give us ears today. If you notice on the front end of him, he's got little bald patches on his knees. These are his front knees, or what we call the carpi. That's very normal for goats to have a callus there. They will also sometimes have a callus on their keel bone, which is right up in here. And so if you see those kind of things, that's a variation in normal. If you're not sure, look at the other animals that are there. Another thing you'll notice about Dan is that he is nice and sleek, and that when I touch him, I can just barely make out his ribs and his spine, so he's in pretty good shape. You will see animals in disaster situations that are in poor shape, whose ribs are showing or who have a rough hair coat, and those are things that we make note of, but in disasters it's not a time to concentrate as much on husbandry. It's more important that we just get the animals stabilized. So he's looking quite healthy to me. If I want to look at his feet, as you can imagine, hooves burning is one of the most common things that we see in these animals that have been burned over by a fire. What I do is I ask my assistant to walk them over to a solid structure like a fence. So we'll take Dan over. And again, Dan's very tame. Not all ruminants are going to be this compliant. As you can see, Jessie has her knees bent. She has the goat positioned against the fence. She's got her head back, and she's keeping her feet out from underneath of his feet. So this is a very safe way to restrain a goat. If you've got a very large goat, another option is to take your rope and secure the rope. And this is something, we call this snugging up the animal. So this is a way that you can make sure that you can control the front end of the goat with a snug up. If he did have horns, I would actually have Jessie hold the base of the horn. That's not a comfortable thing for the ruminant, but it is the best way to keep the human safe that's doing the exam on the ruminant. So you will notice that Jessie has one hand on the base of the horn and one hand under the chin, and that is a humane way to stabilize that head for an exam. And you can come in now and do what you need to do, and it would be difficult for the goat to tilt its head and hurt you, and you're not putting undue pressure on the goat's horns, which are attached to its skull. If you do use horns without stabilizing the head, you do run a risk of injuring the goat. So we recommend that you have one hand, as we said, at the base of the horn and another one under the chin. For short periods of time, it's okay to hold a horn at the base to stabilize the animal, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna look at Dan for a sec. I'm gonna take his head. You notice I have my head back, and I'm just gonna peek at his mucous membranes, and he's gonna fight. But his mucous membranes are nice and pink and moist, and you can see he sent his little front foot out at me. Imagine if you had yourself right here, he would have struck you with his foot. To inspect Dan's foot, what I'm gonna do is I have my knees bent, I've got my head off to the side, I'm gonna let him know I'm coming, and I'm gonna reach down, and I'm gonna pick up that foot, and I'm gonna look at it. And as you can see, Dan's feet are mildly overgrown here. He's got some hoof hanging over the edge. That's perfectly fine. There's no evidence of burn. There's no evidence of discomfort. There's no swelling. I'm going to put his foot down and be done with that. Hind feet are very different. When you're working on the hind feet on any ruminant, it is against their their evolutionary brain to let anything restrain a hind foot. So when you come to a hind foot, you're going to have a fight. And the best thing, again, is to have your good handler. I've got my knees bent. I've got my head away. I'm going to let him know I'm here. I'm going to pick up this foot. Now they're often going to fight. Again, Dan is a very good boy. What you don't want to do is put your head right over where they can kick you, and they will. So you're off to the side, and again, I'm going to look at his claws. You can see that he needs a trim, but there's no evidence of burn. I can squeeze him, nothing hurts, it's all flexible, and that's a good way to inspect their limb. Taking vitals on a ruminant does require a good handler, and again, as you can see, Jessie has Dan up against the fence. She's got her knees bent, light pressure on him. Sometimes less is more with these guys, so if you can get them to just stand quietly, then we let up and let the fence do most of the work. Obtaining a vital on a goat or sheep is very similar to a horse in the sense that we're looking for the same things. We're wanting to get a heart rate if we can. From a distance, we're watching his respiration rate, so we're watching his chest rise and fall, and you can do that from a distance. You can also do that while you're taking the heart rate. And then we are also going to look a little bit at gut motility, and I'll explain that more. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my stethoscope on, and remember the stethoscope earbuds are facing forward. So a good rule of thumb to find the heart on a ruminant is to put your hand at the point of their elbow, come up just about an inch, and then send your stethoscope under their triceps musculature. If you do that, you're going to be right over their heart. You can see I'm behind my assistant. I've got my knees bent. I'm going to come right above the elbow. I'm going to listen for 10 seconds, and I'm going to multiply the number of beats I hear by 6. And in the ruminant, their heart rate is very similar to ours. So oftentimes they're going to be around 80 beats per minute. They can be up to 120 beats per minute, and that can be okay. And the sound that you're going to hear is a lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. That's a normal resting respiratory rate for a goat, nice and slow. Here he is. Goats are usually going to be anywhere between 18 and 24 breaths a minute, and that can vary a little bit based on their size. And then I can count again the number of times I see his chest rise and fall in a 10-second period and multiply that by 6, and that will be his resting respiratory rate. When we need to take the temperature of a goat or a sheep, again, it's really important that you have good general restraint. So you can see that Jessie has Dan up against the fence. And what I'm going to do is I have my thermometer. I've got gloves on. I'm going to approach Dan. I'm going to let him know I'm here. Again, I'm going to keep my knees bent. I'm going to lift up his tail, and I'm going to go ahead and insert thermometer into rectum. Most of these guys aren't going to like that, so as you can see, we're just going to kind of stay off to the side and out of the way, and we're going to wait for the temperature to read digitally. Realize that a normal temperature on a goat is up to 102.5. On a hot day, they can be up to 103.5. I start to worry when they're over 104 and realize a sheep on a hot day will push that limit. Dan's temperature is 101.4, which is quite normal. And so when I'm done, I go ahead and I take the thermometer out, tell him he's a good boy. When we're listening for gut motility in a ruminant, one really easy way to assess their gut and their rumen is if they're chewing cud, you're good. If they're chewing cud, their rumen's working great. If you're not sure, what you do is you feel for the last rib on these guys on the left-hand side. I always work on the left-hand side when I'm doing an exam. And then you pop your stethoscope into that fossa right behind his last rib. And in a normal ruminant, in a 40-second period, they will have a contraction, a primary rumen contraction, that will actually push your hand out of that fossa. And so I track my time on my watch. I'm going to watch for 40 seconds. And then I make sure that during that period of time, he has a primary contraction. And you'll feel it because your stethoscope will actually get pushed up and out. And it's happening right now. So he's having a contraction now. My stethoscope's coming up, and then it's going back in. And again, if they're having good rumen contractility, that's a good indicator that they are well hydrated and doing okay. When we're assessing hydration in an animal in the field, whether it's a small ruminant or one of your teammates in your truck, one of the best indicators of hydration in all species is mental brightness. So as people become dehydrated, as humans become dehydrated, they will get less talkative. As a ruminant becomes less hydrated, they will become more sedate and quiet. So the first thing we always think about in hydration, whether we're assessing a human or an animal, is are they bright? Are they responsive? Do they react to us? And as you can see, he's very responsive. So he's bright. And then I have 4 points that I will check on a small ruminant, just like I will do on a horse. The first is, and we've already talked a little bit about this, I've got his head. I'm just going to lift up his lip. He's got a nice moist mouth, and his gums are nice and pink. That's the first thing I look at. Second thing I'm going to look at on him is his jugular fill. This takes a little practice, but if you hold off his jugular vein and let go on both sides, that area right there where the jugular live is going to fill right up. And that takes some practice, but that's a good indicator. So I'm going to hold it. You can see it rise up. Then you see it fall. So I'm going to hold it off. I'm going to let it go. Third thing I'm going to do is just pinch right over his shoulder blade, and you can see that when I pinch and let go, that skin goes right back down, just like in a horse or other species. So that tells me that he's pretty well hydrated. And then finally, as we discussed before, I will listen to their gut. And the gut, if he's well hydrated, should produce a primary contraction every 40 seconds, which is going to move my stethoscope up out of his fossa, and he's having one right now. Good boy. One of the sneakiest things that occurs with small ruminants, goat, sheep included, is smoke inhalation. Oftentimes, if they are in an environment where the fire burned over, and especially if they have burned feet, it is very likely that they have also injured their lungs. They won't tell you that. They might just be quiet. They might not be coughing. They might not have discharge. They will often be panting. A sheep is going to pant on a 101-degree day. But just to be safe, if I have animals that show evidence of singe or burn over, oftentimes I recommend that you consult with a veterinarian, and we will often put these guys on antibiotics prophylactically just to be safe, because they seem to be, especially sheep, more susceptible to smoke inhalation. Oftentimes in shelter in place, you'll come across animals that have been injured, either by penetration of sticks or branches or roofing material from high winds. You'll see burns. You'll see all sorts of trauma in these animals. And in most cases, we would have you take a picture of what you're seeing, get it to your leader, and have a veterinary consult in the field. There are situations that can be life and death when it comes to bleeding in animals, similar to humans, and then we need to take some steps to stop the bleed. Venous bleeding is your veins are under less pressure than your arteries, and venous bleeding does need to be stopped if it is dripping faster than a leaky faucet. So if you have blood that's sort of running out in fast drips, that is something where we would want to apply pressure, get a wrap on there, and then get the animal stabilized for transport if that is what the veterinarian recommends. Arterial bleeding is coming from an artery which is under high pressure, and arterial bleeding is going to present itself in spurts. So if you arrive and there's spurting blood, that is a life or death situation, and that is a situation where you're going to want to apply pressure with a large wad of 4x4s, which you'll find in your kit, and then get some gauze around that and some of this elasticon over that, and get the animal stabilized again for transport if that is what the veterinarian recommends. There are a few instances where you should have a veterinary consult before you move a small ruminant. Certainly a fractured or dangling leg would be a reason to leave the animal alone, film it from a distance, and consult with a veterinarian, as that might require more help and more stabilization. If you have an animal that has excessive bleeding, where there is spurting blood, or blood that's dripping faster than a leaky faucet, you might want to secure that site before loading the animal up. And you can use similar materials as we use in other species to create a pressure wrap onto a site and then go ahead and place a wrap. And we'll demonstrate that here with Dan. We have Jesse restraining. We've got him against the fence. If Dan had horns, we'd either control his horns or keep our heads back. And then to put a light wrap on a goat would be a very similar thing. I'm off to the side, I've got my head back. If we had an injury that was spurting blood or that was dripping faster than a leaky faucet that was generally running, either a venous injury, deep venous injury, or arterial blood, we would use some gauze. We'd be able to go ahead and place a light wrap. You can see that I'm off to the side. You can see that I've got my head back. I'm going to secure this site for travel. And this is something that we would do only in a circumstance where we've consulted with a veterinarian and this needs to be stabilized before we put the animal into a carrier. So we can get a light wrap on. You can see that Jesse's doing a good job restraining him. This is going to be a normal amount of struggle that you're going to see from a ruminant. I've got my wrap on there, and then we're going to go ahead and load Dan up. In some situations, when you arrive for shelter in place or evacuation, the decision is going to be made to remove animals from the site if it's safe to do so and if that's what the owner has requested. In that case, with small ruminants, we do have crates that are often large enough to put a small ruminant into, and then you would have to have a team lift that crate into the back of a pickup truck and secure that crate down. We never have animals loose in the back of a pickup truck, we don't tie them in the back of the pickup truck, and we don't bring animals into the cab of a truck, because if they become frightened, it could cause an accident or harm to one of the people caring for that animal. So in this case, Lieutenant Dan is small enough that we can put him into this crate. If he had large horns, then we would need to get him into a stock trailer, and ideally what we would do is use a stock trailer with a ramp so that we could get him in there safely. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put Dan in here, and the safest thing to do is to send them in head first, and they're not going to want to go in unless you've trained them to want to go in with treats. And then when they spin around, you can take their leash off, which I do recommend for transport. So we'll go ahead and put Dan in. Oftentimes it takes 2 people. We're going to lead him up to the site. We're going to have him duck his head. He's an excellent animal. He barely fits. And then we're going to let him turn around and take off his leash and shut the door, and he gets an A+. One thing that we have to be really careful about when we're dealing with small ruminants are rams and bucks. So unneutered males can be very unpredictable and they can be very dangerous to work with. If you are sent out on a mission and you notice that there is an intact male in the herd, or if there is a large goat with large horns in the herd, that is something that you want a more experienced person to take on. Oftentimes when the animal is sort of sizing you up, they will face you, they will stomp, they will approach you. If you're seeing that sort of behavior, it is appropriate to retreat and wait for a more experienced person. An animal with this kind of mass can really injure you. They can hit you in your joints and hurt your knees. They can take you out from the back. So I'm always very careful around these animals. I keep my knees bent. I usually have heavy work gloves on, and I have a plan to get them into a small area with good help, good experienced help. If you come across this animal and it's bright and alert and it's been chewing its cud and it comes up to feed, there is no reason to handle it. You can just assess it over the fence. It's only if the animal's been burned or injured or there's something on your distant assessment that's making you want to take a closer look that you need to interact with these guys. And if that's the case, make sure and contact your leader for more experienced help. A good trick to catch one of these guys is to go ahead and offer them a little bit of grain. Again, I know him. And I've got him. But if you don't know him, you're not going to want to get yourself that close, okay? Once I've got him, what I'd like to do, I'll have my assistant Jessie help me, is I usually like to get them up against a fence where I'll let him have a treat for being caught, where I can restrain him safely. And again, what we'll often do is put them against the fence, a little bit of leaning in. You can notice Jessie's knees are bent. She's got her feet out from underneath. We've got our head back. And if we need a little extra leverage, it's okay to snug the animal up as long as you're not choking them out. And so that's something that we have to be cognizant of. Now that we've caught him up and we have him secured, this is a great time to investigate whatever it is that prompted you to gather him up. Was he limping at the walk? Was he breathing very heavily? Does he have bleeding somewhere that you could see or a swollen limb? This form of restraint is a nice way to do it. One other option that you have is that many of these lambs are show lambs, and if you can restrain them like this, many of them will stand that way. You need to have your knees bent and you need to be cognizant that they can still rear. So you've got to have yourself well planted, but this is another nice way to restrain a sheep. So once I've looked at him and I've decided, okay, I need to see why he's limping, I'm going to approach him. I'm going to let my tech know I'm coming. I've got my knees bent, head to the side. I'm going to reach and I'm going to take a look at that foot, look for any evidence of burns, swelling, bleeding, anything like that. All joints work fine. You notice that he was pretty reasonable for that. Prey animals do not like to have their hind feet held or examined. It's just burned in their brain that that's bad for them because that's how predators catch them. So when I come to the hind end, I'm always aware that I could be kicked, stepped on, all forms of fights. So knees bent, I let my tech know what I'm doing. I've got my head turned away. I'm going to reach down for that leg and realize they can snap it up really quickly. And I'm going to pick it up. You can notice he did that. Again, I've got my body away. I'm going to inspect. My head's away. I'm going to feel everything. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that leg back down. Don't underestimate the power of that kick or the ability of those cloven feet to damage your feet when you're down there. So when I'm going to take his temperature, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to let my tech know I'm coming. Knees bent. I'm actually going to lean into that fence. So I'm creating a little bit of a squeeze for the animal. I'm going to reach down, I'm going to insert my thermometer, and I'm going to wait for that to click. You'll notice I've got my knees bent, I've got my toes out from underneath, and I've got myself well positioned so that if he jumps, I'm not relying on him for my own balance. Sheep can be up to 104 on a hot day. They can also really pant, as you can imagine, under a wool coat like this. Those things can be normal. But if he's depressed, if he doesn't want to get up, if he's got his ears down and back, or if he's got open mouth breathing, panting, those would be reasons to check in with your supervisor to decide whether or not he needs any additional assistance. Head to toe assessment, very similar as other small ruminants. We're just going to look at those eyes. Are they nice and open? No tearing, no discharge. Nostrils are nothing coming from the nostrils, nothing coming from the mouth. You can peek at his gums. They're nice and moist. Color will vary, so I look mostly for moistness. I don't look for color as much because they've got a lot of black pigment. Hydration, a little harder with all this wool, but his brightness is gives you one indication of hydration. You can do skin turgor on these guys. To listen to his heart, it's the same as in the sheep. or in the goats, you're going to feel for the top of his elbow. You're going to come up about 2 inches and you're going to stick your stethoscope right under that elbow. You're going to listen to the number of beats that you count in a 10-second period, and you're going to multiply that by 6. You can watch his respiratory rate while you're doing that. Normal rise and fall of the chest. These guys can run a little bit higher, especially on hot days, but normal should be around 18 to 36. And then last but not least, when we listen for gut motility, we're going to switch sides with our tech. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to feel for his last rib. And then I'm going to put my stethoscope down into that fossa there, and I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure. You can notice how we're positioned, our knees are bent. And every 40 seconds, his rumen is going to push my hand out of this fossa. That's called a primary contraction, and that is another good indicator of hydration on this guy.